My name is Gayle Heney, and I'd like to welcome you to Write Now, the show designed to encourage you to write. My guest today is Brunonia Barry, and she, in my view, is living the writer's fantasy of a successful book. It's titled The Lace Reader. Prior to its independent release and subsequent purchase by an imprint of HarperCollins Publishers, she worked with theater companies in both Maine and Chicago. Later, she became a script reader and did so for 10 years. She also worked as a public relations writer. Having never sold a script of her own, in 1995, she and her husband moved to Salem, Massachusetts. In Salem, they started a game and puzzle software company called Smart Games. In 2004, she wrote a short novel for Beacon Street Girls under a pseudonym, and this book was targeted to preteens. In 2000, she began working on the adult novel, The Lace Reader, which, as you know, we're going to discuss today. And finally, she studied literature and creative writing at Green Mountain College in Vermont and also the University of Vermont. Brunonia Barry, a most warm welcome to Write Now.
Thanks so much, Gail.
Tell us, back in June 2008, you attended an American Library Association conference,
Yes.
and you spoke then with Virginia Stanley.
Yes, that was fun.
In that interview, you talked about the Lace Reader as being a hero's journey for women.
Yes, I did.
What did you mean by that?
Well, I was trying to, and this comes partly from my years in Hollywood as a reader. I was reading all sorts of scripts, and every time they had a woman's journey or a woman's story with a strong protagonist, they usually found a way to kill her off in the end of the story. And I started thinking, I think there's another woman's story out there. And I think the hero's journey, a la Joseph Campbell or James Joyce's Monomyth, would be a great story to try to play out in a local novel.
Talking about the local connection, I understand that before your book, The Lace Reader, there were not lace readers. And now in Salem, Massachusetts, there are.
There are.
So could you tell us how you came up with the idea of reading lace?
I can, and I'll give you a bit of a short, it's a very long story, but basically we moved back to Marblehead before we moved to Salem from the West Coast, and I had a dream. We were renovating a kitchen, and I had a dream that I was looking through an old piece of lace that my grandmother had given me, my Irish grandmother, and looking at what the kitchen would look like when it was finished, when they knocked down some walls in the middle of the room, which we needed to do to enlarge it. And it was a beautiful piece of Ipswich bobbin lace made by nuns at a school, local school in Salem. And it didn't, you know, in dreams things make sense that don't normally make sense. So it made sense
Yes,
to look
that's
through
true.
a piece of lace to see what a kitchen would look like. But what I saw when I looked through the lace was a field of horses. And that doesn't make sense in a kitchen. I expected to see granite countertops or something, but horses, that wasn't sensible. So, but I woke up very nervous because I'm deathly allergic to horses, so it was kind of an anxiety dream. And then the next morning, the contractor came in to knock out the final wall and started to put his mask on and said, I hate this old horsehair plaster. It gets in the air and stays forever.
Oh, and you needed to know it was
I
horsehair
needed
because
to.
you're allergic to it.
Exactly. So I think it saved me a trip to the emergency room, and also living with this dust, you know, horsehair dust, I probably would have had to move out.
Well, as I understand it, it takes months for dust to settle when you've
Yes.
had renovations.
Yes, so I understand. This is the first time we ever renovated. We were apartment dwellers back in LA, so we were doing all sorts of things that were new to us. So.
Well, I'm delighted that you found that out before you ended up in the emergency room. Tell me, it's been said that this book is about intuition,
Yes.
that it's about witchcraft, that it could be about mysticism. What's your view?
I think it's a book about perception, both the characters and the readers, actually, and about intuition. And I think intuition, I haven't had a mother who was extremely intuitive, to the point where she could tell you things that she couldn't possibly know. And as she got older, she got more intuitive. It was problematic when I was a teenager and she knew everything I was doing, but it got more intense as she lost some other of her faculties because she had a bit of dementia as well. And I have a bit of it. And my whole family, you know, the Irish-English combination, I think, is it's an intuitive group. So I'm comfortable with it to a certain extent, but I also think it's something quite scientific that we will find is part of our brain that we're just not using very much. But I'm very, very interested in intuition. But I'm also interested in perception. And by that I mean, one of the characters in the book says, you see what you expect to see. And I think it's true for the reading of this book, but I think it's true in life as well. So, you know, we have certain expectations when we read a book, or just in looking at anything, that we think we know what we're looking at. And this is a book that kind of asks you to question that a bit.
I also saw this book as a search for the self.
Yes, very definitely.
With the goal of potentially healing.
Yes, it is a book about healing. Yes,
Yeah.
a whole family, actually. Yes.
Interesting family. Tell us, on page 1, Towner Whitney, for those of you who may not have yet read the book, Towner Whitney proclaims, I am a crazy woman. She wasn't kidding, was she?
Well, that also has to do with your perception as a reader.
Okay.
I tend to, well, you know, in writing it, I don't think you ever think of your characters that way. You have to really understand where they're coming from. But she certainly is, the other word they used in Salem for crazy is quirky. So she's certainly quirky, and she's certainly wounded and has a lot of healing to do. So whether, I think, you know, I tend to think she's rather sane and quite a survivor. But she's been called crazy a lot, so she labels herself as crazy. And she also tells you she's a liar and never to believe her, which is also true.
You know, it was interesting. After beginning the book, I started to Google different terms, different psychological terms.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found one that I think that fits beautifully.
Okay.
But I don't think I want to talk about that today because I don't want to I don't want to give those of you who have yet to read the book my perceptions of reality, and we'll stop there. What I would like to talk about is each section of the book, and there are about 35 chapters, and I think 6 sections. Each begins with an excerpt from the Lace Reader's Guide.
Yes.
And if you'll indulge me, I'm going to read the first Lace Reader's Guide introduction from part 1. And the Lace Reader's Guide was written by one of the characters which is in the book, an older woman, very wise older woman. The lace reader must stare at the piece of lace until the pattern blurs and the face of the seeker disappears completely behind the veil. When the eyes begin to fill with tears and the patience is long exhausted, there will appear a glimpse of something not yet seen. And I thought this was a terrific introduction, but besides that, I love that you were building authenticity into the book right from the very beginning, even before Whitner Towney says, I'm crazy. So tell me where you got the idea from. How did you know to build a book into a book?
Well, and it didn't start that way. I started by writing the chapters, but in about a third of the way into the book, Towner, in sorting through her aunt's things, finds her journal. And part of her journal is an instruction manual on how to read a piece of lace, because that's what she did. She ran a tea room and she read lace for people. Mm-hmm. So that was, so I started thinking, what would that journal look like? And I stepped aside from the book for a minute and started writing Eva's journal. And it was in a very different voice. It just, you know, comes to you that way. And it detailed lace reading, but also things like time and tide charts, how to, you know, she had a wonderful garden, so it was some gardening tips, and she made tea and blended teas, so some tea recipes, and all sorts of things that might be in this woman's journal. But what I picked up from for the chapters was how to read a piece of lace. Because I think and I've been told by readers, I didn't know this, but I've been told by readers that it serves as a guide to reading the entire book. But who knew?
Huh. Yes, for me, though, it just